The smell of sawdust and machine oil had become my version of cologne. 11 years of it, soaked into my flannel shirts and the creases of my hands, and I'd stopped noticing it the same way you stop noticing the sound of your own breathing. I worked out of a converted garage on the east side of Portland, fixing things people had given up on: old lamps, circuit boards, the kind of vintage radios that reminded retired men of their fathers. My sign out front said Hayes Repair, Est, 2014. Nothing fancy, just a name and a year, and the quiet promise that I'd do honest work for honest pay. It was a Tuesday morning in November when my phone rang. I was soldering a connection on a 1962 Zenith transistor radio for a man named Earl who lived 2 streets over. The call came from a Seattle area code I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I got enough robocalls. "Is this Robert Hayes?" A woman's voice. Measured. Professional. Speaking. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Constance Albright. I'm a senior partner at Whitmore & Associates in Seattle. I'm calling regarding the estate of Carol Harrington Miles." I set the soldering iron down slowly in its cradle. Carol. I hadn't said her name out loud in years. Hadn't let myself. There were whole sections of my memory I'd learned to walk around the way you walk around a sinkhole you know is there carefully, without looking directly at it. "I see," I said. "Mrs. Harrington Miles passed away on Friday evening. Cardiac event. The memorial service is this Thursday at 2 o'clock in Seattle, followed by a reading of her will at our offices at 4:30. Your presence has been specifically requested, Mr. Hayes." The words arrived one at a time, like packages left on a porch in the rain. "By whom?" I asked. "By Mrs. Harrington Miles herself. It was stipulated in her instructions." I looked around my garage. The Zenith radio sat half open on the workbench. A ceiling fan I'd been meaning to rewire hung in the corner. A coffee mug with the Portland Trailblazers logo had gone cold beside the door. 11 years. Carol was dead. My son, who hadn't spoken to me in a decade, would be at that reading. "I'll be there," I said. After I hung up, I sat on my stool for a long time without moving. Outside, November rain tapped against the garage door, in the particular rhythm that always reminded me of the engineering lab where I'd spent 15 years building something I believed in. Harrington Systems had been a good company once, before it became something else entirely. Before I became something else entirely, at least in everyone else's eyes. I went inside, stood at the bathroom mirror, and looked at the man looking back. 61 years old, gray at the temples, deep lines around the eyes, the kind of face that had spent too much time outdoors doing work that paid in dignity rather than dollars. I'd been a chief engineer once. I'd held 11 patents with my name on them. I'd built the navigation software that Harrington Systems had licensed to 3 major aerospace contractors and made Carol's company worth something real. Then, I'd supposedly stolen it. Sold proprietary schematics to a competitor for personal gain. That was the story. That was what my son believed. What the industry believed. What the court documents reflected. That was Carol's story. And she'd told it flawlessly. I didn't own a good suit anymore. I drove to a Goodwill on Wednesday morning and found a charcoal gray one that fit well enough. The woman at the register smiled at me and said it looked sharp. I thanked her and didn't explain why I needed it. The drive to Seattle took 3 hours. I put on a baseball game on the radio and let the commentary fill the cab of my truck without really listening. The Cascades came and went on either side of I-5, white-capped and indifferent. The same mountains they'd always been. I'd driven this highway hundreds of times before, back when I was somebody, back when I had a lanyard badge and a parking spot with my name on it, and a son who called me on Sunday afternoons to talk about football. I booked a room at a budget motel near the memorial venue. Nothing more than a bed and a shower, which was all I needed. The service was held at a chapel in the Eastlake neighborhood, all blonde wood and ambient lighting, the kind of space that cost money to feel spiritual. I sat in the back row. There were people I half recognized from the industry: board members, executive types, a city councilman whose name I couldn't quite place. Carol had accumulated influence the way she'd accumulated everything else, strategically, and at whatever cost was necessary. My son stood at the front, beside a woman I assumed was his wife, though I'd never met her. He was 38 now. I'd missed all of it, the promotion to VP, the marriage, whatever else a decade contains. He looked like me at that age, which was a strange thing to register from 40 rows away in a chapel where I was invisible. Taller than I remembered, the same set to his jaw when he was holding something in. I left before the service ended. I couldn't risk him seeing me there, not before the reading. Whatever was about to happen, I wanted it to happen in the right order. Whitmore and Associates occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Fifth Avenue that smelled like leather and recirculated air. The receptionist checked my name against a list and directed me to a conference room with views of Elliott Bay going silver in the afternoon light. I arrived before anyone else and took a seat near the window, away from the head of the table, the way you sit when you don't expect to matter. The executives filtered in over the next 20 minutes. Directors of various divisions, 2 men from the board, a woman I recognized as Carol's chief operating officer. They saw me, and their conversations shifted subtly, the way air pressure changes before weather. My son arrived at 4:28. He was wearing a charcoal suit that was considerably better than mine. He moved through the door, the way people do when they've made peace with the idea that they're about to inherit something significant, a controlled energy, the posture of someone ready to receive what they're owed. Then he saw me. He stopped walking mid-stride. For 2 full seconds, nothing happened, not a word. Not a movement, just the specific silence of a man encountering something his mind hadn't prepared for. "What are you doing here?" His voice was quiet. That was the thing about my son that always distinguished him from me. I'd been loud when I was angry. He went cold. "I was asked to come," I said. "By who?" "By your mother, apparently." He looked at me the way he might look at a structural flaw someone had pointed out in a bridge he'd trusted for years. Then Constance Albright came through the door, and the moment passed, sealed over like ice reforming after something had broken through. Miss Albright was perhaps 50, with the particular economy of movement that good attorneys develop after years of delivering difficult information. She arranged her papers at the head of the table, greeted the assembled parties with brief professional warmth, and folded her hands. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "I'll get to the specific bequests shortly. But Mrs. Harrington Miles asked very specifically that I read a prepared statement before anything else. She was insistent that this take place before the legal portion of the proceedings." She paused. "I'll ask that everyone allow me to finish reading before any responses." "Thank you." She opened a document in a cream-colored folder and began. "To those present, I have spent 11 years building a version of this company that stood on a foundation only I knew was rotten. I'm not interested in your absolution. I'm not asking for it. What I'm asking, what I'm demanding, from beyond whatever comes after this, is that the record be corrected. Not because the truth serves me. It doesn't. It only serves the man sitting in this room who should never have had to carry what I made him carry." The room had gone quiet in the particular way that rooms do when people understand, all at once, that something is about to change. Miss Albright continued reading. "Robert Hayes did not sell proprietary schematics to Vantage Aeronautics. He did not commit corporate espionage. He did not betray this company, this industry, or our family. I did all of those things, and I made sure that he took the blame for it." Someone at the far end of the table exhaled slowly. My son had gone very still. In the spring of 2013, Miss Albright read, "Harrington Systems was in trouble. We had expanded aggressively into 3 defense contracts we were not yet equipped to fulfill, and our reserve capital was nearly exhausted. I made the decision, unilaterally and without board knowledge, to approach Vantage Aeronautics and offer them early access to Robert's navigational sequencing patents in exchange for a licensing payment that would stabilize our cash position. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would make it right. I told myself, as people like me always do, that the ends justified the means." Miss Albright turned the page. "Robert discovered what I'd done during a routine compliance review. He came to me privately. He had the documentation. He told me he intended to go to the board and to our legal counsel. He was right to do so. What I had done was a breach of fiduciary duty, a violation of federal trade secret law, and a betrayal of everyone in this company who had trusted me. My son was staring at the table in front of him. His wife had reached over and put her hand on his arm. I told Robert the truth, that if he came forward, the company would collapse. Not because of the scandal alone, but because of the government contract audits that would follow. 340 people would lose their jobs. And then I told him something else. I told him that Daniel, our son, who had just joined the company as a junior systems analyst, would be implicated. Not falsely. There had been a moment, months earlier, when Daniel had inadvertently emailed a preliminary schematic to an external address. A mistake. A small one, which I had quietly buried. I told Robert that if he pursued this, I would be unable to protect Daniel, that the investigators would find that email, that our son's career would be over before it started. The silence in the room had a texture to it now. Robert made a decision that I have not deserved a single day since. He agreed to say nothing on the condition that I would ensure Daniel's future at the company, that I would mentor him, that I would protect what I had threatened to destroy. In exchange, he would accept responsibility for the breach. He would say he had acted alone, for personal financial gain. He would take the plea. He would go to prison. He would lose his engineering licenses, his professional standing, and any access to the patents that bore his name. He did all of those things. And I let him. My son's chair scraped back slightly. He didn't stand. He just needed the room. Daniel never knew, Miss Albright continued. I made certain of that. I built the narrative carefully, the criminal father, the selfish man who'd sold out his family for a competitor's check. I made sure Daniel had reason to be angry rather than confused. Anger is easier to maintain. Confusion asks too many questions. I am not proud of this. I am not seeking to frame it as anything other than what it was. A deliberate, sustained lie that I told my son about his father for 11 years. Because the truth would have cost me everything, and I was not willing to pay that price. Robert was. Miss Albright set down the first page. My son looked at me then. Really looked. Not the controlled, cold look from when he'd entered the room, but something rawer than that. Something that was trying to compute an entirely new set of variables. I met his eyes and said nothing. Miss Albright continued with the bequests. To the COO, a generous severance and a block of preferred shares. To the senior directors, a collective fund for transition bonuses. To her second husband, the family home in Medina and a life insurance policy she'd maintained separately. Charitable endowments to 3 organizations. Then, to my son, Daniel, who I raised to be exceptional and taught, by example, to be ruthless, I leave the sum of $100, and this message. The company you are standing in was built on your father's silence. Before you lead it, you should understand what real sacrifice looks like. The $100 is not an insult. It is a starting point. Everything should be earned. That is the one true thing I believe, and the one thing I never lived. My son's wife reached for his hand again. He didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either. He was somewhere else entirely. The remainder of my estate, Miss Albright said, and the room drew in on itself slightly, including all common and preferred shares of Harrington Systems, all intellectual property portfolios, all real property holdings, all liquid assets, and all other financial instruments. With a combined estimated value of $94 million, I leave in full to my former husband, Robert Allen Hayes, the only person in this room who earned anything. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the room came apart in the polite, muffled way that rooms full of professionals come apart, chairs shifting, voices dropping to urgent murmurs, eyes moving between the lawyer, my son, and me. I sat with my hands folded on the table. I had expected something. Not this, but something. And yet it landed the way a very large truth lands, when you've been living in the shadow of its opposite for a long time. Not with triumph, but with a kind of exhausted weight. Like finally putting down a box you'd forgotten you were carrying. There's one additional item, Miss Albright said, and the room quieted again. She withdrew a sealed envelope from the folder, plain white, my name written on it in Carol's angular, precise handwriting. Missus, Harrington Miles asked that you read this privately. I'll give you time after the business portion concludes. She placed it on the table in front of me. The transfer procedures are complex given the volume of assets involved. We'll need you in this office regularly over the coming weeks. My son stood up. His chair didn't scrape, he moved it deliberately, the way he did everything. This won't hold, he said. His voice was steady but thin at the edges. She wasn't well at the end. I'll have it reviewed. Mrs. Harrington Miles underwent independent psychological evaluation by 2 physicians in September and 1 in October. Miss Albright said, without looking up from her papers. All 3 certified her cognitive capacity. She also prepared a supplementary legal memorandum, anticipating this specific challenge. She did look up then, with the particular patience of someone who has said a thing they've said many times. The will is sound, Mr. Hayes. He sold secrets from this company. My son's voice cracked on the last word, not with grief, but with the sound of a belief that was breaking. He admitted it. He pled guilty. He pled guilty to protect you, Miss Albright said quietly. As your mother just explained. My son looked at me. The anger was still there, but it was sitting differently now, the way a piece of furniture looks different once you know what's underneath it. Is it true? He asked. Yes, I said. Why didn't you ever? He stopped. Started again. You had 11 years. You could have told me. You could have said something. Your mother asked me not to, and I'd made a promise. To her. His voice dropped. You kept a promise to the person who destroyed you. I made a promise to myself. I said. I don't make promises I intend to break. He stood there for another moment. Then he walked out. His wife followed, and I heard her heels in the hallway. And then nothing. The other executives left in 1s and 2s, careful not to make eye contact with me on their way out. Within 15 minutes, the conference room was empty, except for Miss Albright and me. She said you'd take it quietly, Miss Albright said, sliding papers into her folder. She said you wouldn't celebrate. Nothing to celebrate. $94 million feels like something to most people. I didn't want $94 million. I picked up the envelope. I wanted my son to know the truth about his father. She could have given me that for free, 11 years ago. Miss Albright was quiet for a moment. She loved you, in the way that people love things they've already destroyed. I don't say that to excuse it, just to report it. I know, I said. She left me alone in the conference room. The city spread out below in the early dark, Seattle's lights beginning to sharpen as evening settled over the water. I held the envelope in both hands without opening it. Outside, a ferry was crossing the bay, its lit windows moving slowly toward the other shore. I broke the seal. The letter was written by hand, which surprised me. Carol had always typed everything. The handwriting was uneven in places. The way it gets when someone is writing something they've rewritten in their head 1,000 times and can't get comfortable with any version. Robert, it began. I've rehearsed this letter for 3 years and it still sounds like an excuse. So I'll try to be exact. I was told in August of last year that I had lung cancer, the kind that doesn't negotiate. I was given 6 to 8 months. I have had 14, through sheer pharmaceutical stubbornness. But I am at the end of that, and I know it. And so what I am writing now is the closest thing to a deathbed confession that a woman who doesn't believe in God can offer. I thought knowing I was dying would make this easier. It didn't. I still hesitated. I still told myself I needed to structure things properly, protect Daniel's position, ensure an orderly transition. These were all lies I told to avoid the core truth, which is that I was afraid, not of death, of you. Not of what you would do with the truth. I knew what you would do. You would be kind. You would be measured. You would be generous in a way I was never able to imitate. I was afraid of seeing myself the way you must have seen me, as someone who chose her own survival over every decent thing. What finally moved me was Daniel himself. He came to me 3 months ago with an acquisition proposal. He wanted to buy a smaller firm, absorb their engineers, eliminate redundant positions. About 60 jobs. He had a presentation, charts, projections, efficiency gains. I asked him what would happen to the engineers who were let go. He looked at me with complete patience and said, "That's not really our problem, Mom. That's what severance packages are for." I heard myself in him, the precise logic of someone who has learned that people are a category of expense. I built him that way. Partly on purpose, because I thought it would make him strong, and partly by accident, because I raised him on the story of you, the man who'd betrayed his family for money, the example of what happens when sentiment overrules discipline. You were the cautionary tale I invented to make my own choices look reasonable. And Daniel learned the lesson I designed him to learn. So this will is not charity, Robert. It is correction. And it is a request, which you are entirely free to decline. Don't sell the company. Don't dismantle it. 11 years ago, it was something worth being proud of. The navigation work you built, the engineering culture you created. Carol Harrington's company became something smaller than what Robert Hayes started. I would like to see what it could become if the person who actually built it were in a position to shape it. I am asking you to make Harrington Systems into something worth inheriting. And then, if Daniel ever becomes the person he should have been, not the one I made, I am asking you to give it to him. Not before. Not as a gift. Only as something he has earned. I have enclosed a full accounting of what I did in 2013. The communications with Vantage, the financial transfers, the board minutes I altered, the documentation that proves your innocence conclusively. Use it however you choose. Clear your name officially, or leave it in the file. That is yours to decide. I'm sorry. Those two words have never felt more inadequate to the work they're being asked to do. Sorry cannot give back the years. Sorry cannot rebuild what was taken from you. I know this. I am saying it anyway, because silence is what I already gave you for 11 years. And you deserved better than that then, and you deserve better now. Use what I'm leaving you better than I did. Carol, I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in my inside pocket, close to where my heart was busy doing its ordinary work. The bay was dark now. The ferry had reached the other shore, and its lights had merged with the lights of the city there. I sat for a while longer and felt the strangeness of the moment, the way it was both enormous and completely quiet. The way real turning points often are. You expect them to sound like something. Usually they don't. I thought about my garage in Portland, about the Zenith radio sitting half-finished on the workbench, and Earl who would be wondering where it was. I thought about my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, whose porch light had been flickering for 2 weeks, and who kept leaving notes in my mailbox because she knew I'd get to it when I got to it. Small things, honest things, and $94 million, and a company I hadn't thought about in 11 years, and a son who had walked out of this room believing the floor of his entire life had just been removed. The week that followed had the quality of a dream that refuses to behave like one. Miss Albright's firm was efficient and thorough within 4 business days. I had access to accounts containing more money than I could have spent in 2 lifetimes of honest work. Within a week, I had a majority stake in Harrington Systems and a board meeting on the calendar. My son didn't contact me. I didn't contact him. The board meeting was uncomfortable in the way that meetings are uncomfortable when no one in the room knows what they're supposed to be performing. The executives sat in a row and watched me with the polite, calibrated wariness of people who'd spent a decade building careers inside a story that had just been declared false. I was the villain, returned his owner. They didn't know what to do with that. I'm not here to run this company day to day, I told them. I was standing at the head of the table, which felt strange. I don't want to. I want to return it to what it was built, to be a place that makes things worth making, with people who are treated as the point rather than the overhead. I looked at the COO, a woman named Sandra, who had been with the company since before Carol's expansion. Sandra, I'd like you to serve as interim chief executive pending a board vote. You know this place. You've kept it functional for 11 years. Make it functional with integrity, and we'll revisit your title and compensation accordingly. She nodded once. Relief, carefully held in check. I'll be chairing the board. We'll be implementing quarterly independent audits, a direct whistleblower channel that bypasses management, and an ethics compliance review of all existing contracts. I paused. I know some of you are uncertain about my intentions. That's reasonable. You've been told a particular story for a long time. So have I. The difference is that my story turns out to have been a lie. We're going to find out what the true one looks like. Afterward, Sandra walked with me to the elevator. He's been trying to get board support, she said. Your son. He called 4 of the directors in the last 3 days. I know. They're not going to back a challenge. Not after the will statement went into the record. She paused. What are you going to do about him? I don't know yet, I said. Whatever's right. She looked at me for a moment. Carol said, you'd say something like that. Carol knew me well enough to do a lot of things she chose not to do. 3 days later, a text arrived from a number I didn't have saved. I know I don't have any standing to ask you for anything, but I'd like to talk if you're willing. Daniel. I stared at it for a long time. Thought about the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during evening drives when he was 4 years old, who'd called me in a panic junior year when he'd failed an exam, who'd shaken my hand at his college graduation with tears in his eyes and said, I couldn't have done this without you, Dad, and who had, 7 years later, stood in a courtroom and watched me receive a sentence he believed I deserved. I typed back, Sunday, 10 a.m. Tom Douglas Cafe on Pine. I'll be there early. His response came within minutes. Thank you. Sunday arrived gray and damp. I was at the cafe by 9:40, with coffee and a window seat and no particular plan except to tell the truth and see what happened. My son came in at 10 exactly. He was wearing jeans and a fleece jacket. None of the executive armor from the conference room. He looked younger, which was unexpected, and also like someone who hadn't been sleeping well, which was not. He stood at the table. Can I sit down? That's why I picked 2 chairs. He sat, ordered coffee from the server, wrapped both hands around the mug when it arrived, and looked at me, the way you look at a problem you've been working on for days and still can't solve cleanly. I don't know where to begin, he said. That's fine. Take your time. I've been going over it. He shook his head. The timeline. The original investigation. I went back and read everything I could find, the court filings, the news articles, your plea statement. And now, knowing what I know, he stopped. It all holds up. As a lie. It all holds up perfectly because she built it to. She was thorough. She was meticulous. A flash of something in his expression, not quite anger, not quite grief. I keep thinking about the things she said about you. In those early years after, the way she framed it as a moral failure, a weakness, a man who chose money over family. She said it so many times, in so many ways, that it stopped feeling like an opinion and started feeling like a fact. He looked up. I believed it because she needed me to. And because it was easier than the alternative. The alternative being that my mother was capable of doing what she did. He exhaled slowly. To you, to me, to the people in that company. I didn't want to believe that about her. So I believed it about you instead. You were 27, I said. She was your mother and your boss. She'd been the reliable one your whole life. That's not an excuse. No. It's a reason. Those are different things. He looked out the window. A couple walked past with a dog, the dog straining cheerfully toward a puddle. Ordinary Sunday morning. I tried to contest the will, he said. I know. 3 attorneys. Every one of them said the same thing. Airtight. She was thorough, I said again. You could destroy me professionally. You have the documentation she left. You could go to the SEC with what she did. And my name is tied to this company, which means I'm not going to do that. He paused. Why not? Because it wouldn't make anything better. I turned my coffee cup slowly. I didn't go through what I went through so I could spend the back end of my life making people pay. I went through it because I loved you and I thought it was the right call. 11 years changes the arithmetic on whether it was. But the reason I did it doesn't change. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its professional register entirely. You went to prison for me. I went to prison so you could have a career. Whether that was the right choice is something I've had 11 years to think about and still don't have a clean answer to. It wasn't the right choice. He said it firmly, not accusatorially. You shouldn't have had to make it. She shouldn't have put you in that position. No. She shouldn't have. I'm sorry, Dad. The word came out slightly awkwardly, the way it does when it hasn't been used in a long time. For not asking better questions. For not I should have known. I should have pushed harder on the details that didn't add up. I was so angry. and I used that anger as a reason not to think. I looked at my son, 38 years old, sitting across from me in a coffee shop on a Sunday morning, trying to rebuild a picture of himself, using pieces he didn't know were missing. "I'm sorry too," I said, "for the years I wasn't there, for the things I couldn't protect you from because I wasn't in a position to, for the version of me your mother gave you to grow up with." He nodded slowly, drank his coffee. Outside, the gray morning was beginning to soften, not sunshine exactly, but a lightning, the particular Pacific Northwest version of weather improving, which is always partial and provisional and still better than the alternative. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "With all of it, run the company the right way, or make sure Sandra does. Get the ethics framework in place. Use the capital to fund some things that have nothing to do with profit margins." I paused. "And then, eventually, when the time is right and the conditions are right, give it back." He looked up sharply. "To you," I said, "but not now. Not as an inheritance. Not as something handed over because of blood. When you've earned it. I've spent 12 years building toward that company. You've spent 12 years building toward the version of it your mother built, which was built on something it shouldn't have been built on." I held his eyes. "I'm offering you the chance to earn the real version, the one that was worth something before the compromises started. How am I supposed to do that? By starting where it starts, not at the top." I reached into my jacket and set a folded piece of paper on the table between us. "I've created a new position in the Ethics and Compliance Department, a staff-level analyst role. No title inheritance, no fast track, no executive adjacency. You'd be reporting to a compliance director who has no idea who you are and will treat you accordingly." I pushed the paper toward him. "The work is real. The salary is fair. And the only way to move up is to actually know what you're doing." He looked at the paper without picking it up. "You want me to take a staff job at a company I've been running? I want you to take a staff job at a company your mother used to run, that you thought you'd inherit, so that you can learn what it actually means to build something rather than receive it." I paused. "I took a plea deal and served time and lost my license and rebuilt my life from nothing. I'm not asking you to do anything close to that. I'm asking you to take a real job and earn a real future." He picked up the paper. "Read it. Set it down. Read it again. Everyone will know," he said. "Yes, it'll look like punishment. It isn't. But if it looks that way to the people who watch, that says something about how they measure value." A long silence. He folded the paper in half, then in half again. His mother's gesture, I realized the precise, deliberate folding of something that required a decision. "Can I have a few days?" he asked. "The offer doesn't expire." He looked at me then with something I hadn't seen from him in 11 years. Uncertainty without armor. Just a man trying to figure out what the right thing was. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You could close the whole thing out. Take the money, let the company go, move back to Portland and never think about any of us again." I considered that for a moment. "Because you're my son," I said. "And because that was always true, even when you didn't know it was. Even when I was in a cell and you thought you had every reason to. Even now, in this cafe, when you don't know whether you trust me yet and I don't know whether you should, you're still my son. That's not a condition. It's just a fact." He didn't say anything to that. But something in the set of his shoulders changed, almost imperceptibly, the particular physical adjustment of a person who has been braced for something that isn't coming. He left 20 minutes later, stepping out into the Sunday morning that had continued its incremental brightening. I watched him through the window, walking south toward wherever he'd parked. He had his hands in his pockets and his head slightly down, the way he used to walk when he was thinking hard. I finished my coffee slowly and left a generous tip and went out into the damp Seattle air. The drive south that afternoon was quiet. I had a flight from Portland to catch early the next morning. I'd already moved the Zenith radio deadline for Earl back by a week, and I'd texted my neighbor Mrs. Patterson that I'd look at her porch light Tuesday. Small commitments, real ones, but I made one stop first. The cemetery was in a quiet neighborhood in North Seattle. The kind of place that gets the afternoon light right, gold through evergreens, the whole Pacific Northwest quality of beauty that apologizes for nothing. Carol's section was easy to find. The headstone was new granite, simple her name, her dates, and an epitaph that surprised me with its honesty. She built a great deal. In the end, she tried to build something better. I stood in front of it for a long time. There was so much I could have said. 11 years of things I'd worked carefully not to feel. Anger I'd learned to fold away neatly. The way you fold things you can't afford to look at. Loss that had become so familiar it had stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like geography. But what I said, in the end, was this. I'll take care of the company, and I'll take care of him if he'll let me. The wind moved through the cedars the way wind does, without any opinion about any of it. I nodded once, the way you acknowledge a conversation that's over, and walked back to my truck. On the highway south, with the mountains going dark behind me and the radio playing something I wasn't listening to, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from my son. I've been thinking about what you said. About earning something versus receiving it. I think I need to actually think about that for a while before I decide anything. Is that okay? I pulled over at the next rest stop to type back properly. That's exactly the right response. Take whatever time you need. Thinking carefully before deciding is not something I can criticize. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to just answer it without managing my reaction. Go ahead. When you were in that courtroom, when you looked at me, what were you thinking? I sat with the question for a moment. The rest stop was quiet. A few other trucks. The sound of wind against the cab. The last of the November light dying out over the western hills. I was thinking that you looked terrified, I wrote back, and that it wasn't your fault, and that I hoped you'd be okay. In that order, the dots appeared and stayed for a long time. That's the most dad answer you could possibly have given. It's an honest answer. Yeah, he wrote. I'm starting to understand that those are the same thing with you. I put the phone down and sat for another moment in the quiet. Then I pulled back onto the highway and drove south through the dark toward Portland and my garage and the unfinished radio and the ordinary life that had been, for 11 years, the truest thing I owned. I thought about Carol's letter, about the request she'd buried inside the legal language and the assets and the confession. Make it something worth inheriting. Make it what it should have been from the beginning. I thought about my son sitting in a cafe, reading a job description for a staff-level position, trying to decide whether he was the kind of person who could start from the bottom on purpose. I thought about what it had taken me, at 50 years old, to start from less than nothing. The particular humiliation of being 60 and excellent at something nobody would hire you to do. The mornings when the smallness of the life felt like punishment, and the mornings when it felt like freedom, and the mornings when it was hard to tell the difference. I had not been broken by it. That had surprised me. I'd expected to be, and I hadn't been. And what was left when something that should have broken you doesn't is something stronger than what was there before and considerably more useful. I wanted that for my son. Not the suffering. The result. Maybe he'd take the job. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd decide he was too proud, or too pragmatic, or too shaped by 11 years of believing he was owed something that was now provably built on debt. Those would be his choices to make, and his consequences to live. But the offer was there. Permanent, unconditional, without an expiration date, the same way my love for him had always been, even when he didn't know it was there, even when he'd had 11 years of reasons to believe otherwise. Portland came into view as the clock on the dashboard hit 9:40. My exit, my street, my garage with the porch light I always left on. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. On the workbench, the Zenith radio waited, patient in the way that old things are patient. It had been broken for years before Earl brought it to me, and it was still broken, and it would be repaired when I repaired it, and it would work again. Because that's what things do when someone with the right knowledge and the right care decides they're worth fixing. I went inside, put the kettle on, and sat down at the workbench. Some things take time. Some things take the kind of patience that doesn't feel like patience while you're practicing it. The kind that looks, from the outside, like giving up, but is actually the hardest kind of belief there is. believing that broken things can be fixed, believing that truth, even when it arrives 11 years late and from beyond a grave, is still better than the silence it replaces. Believing that a man at 61, with a repair shop and a reclassified reputation and a son who wasn't sure yet what to do with him, could still make something worth leaving behind. The kettle whistled. The rain started up again outside, steady and unhurried, tapping at the garage roof in the same rhythm it always had. I poured my tea and picked up my soldering iron and went back to work.